we'll go ahead and get started here. I appreciate the chance to talk at y'all in a couple of minutes this morning here. For those of you who show up for the Maneuver Warfare Conference and didn't think you'd get a math professor standing in front of you, I'm sorry you do. But hopefully I'll be able to convince you through the talk here that what I'm talking about isn't necessarily a math problem. It's not necessarily a statistician problem or computer science problem. When I think about data literacy, I think about an issue that's fundamental to our future success on the battlefield. And I will say, as I begin here, Colonel Nick Clark, I teach at West Point. What I'm going to talk about today purely reflects my views on this. It's in no way should be attributable to West Point or the math department or the Army. This is just kind of where I've come to understand us in terms of our data literacy. That's us, the force here in terms of our data literacy, where I think we need to go moving forward in order for us to actually be successful on the battlefield. I'm coming at you. I'm the class 2002 graduate. Was a military intelligence officer. Upon graduation, I was in 3rd Ranger Battalion for a little bit doing that, so I got to live on the 11th Street Lost for those of you who are Columbus natives here. Went and did that for a little while. Stayed in the Special Operations community. I've been up at West Point for the last 4 years. Pretty much consecutively, except for last year. Last year I got sent on what I like to call the world's weirdest sabbatical. West Point said, get lost. So I went down to JSOC where I was the chief data scientist inside the global analytics platform we got. I'll share some of those experiences as we kind of go through there. Go to the next slide, please. So I came across this article, and I wanted to throw it up here just because it has the word sexiest in here, and I thought no one else talks about sexy things during the Maneuver Warfare Conference, at least I will. Is data scientist still the sexiest job of the 21st century? And this was a sort of a companion article to something that was in the Harvard Business Review in 2012 saying, hey, the way of the future is data science, right? You want to be successful, go learn how to analyze data. And what they found, as they kind of reflected back on this, is industry was failing. So even though we say that data science is going to be this great job, in reality, as they looked across the spectrum of organizations that had attempted to bring in data scientists, the vast majority of them were failing. And the reason they were failing is because the organizations did not have a culture that allowed those data scientists to be successful. So I came across that article, and I was looking at that in one hand. On the other hand, I had the development of the implementation plan for the Secretary of the Army's primary objectives. Memorandum that the Secretary of the Army produced that said, hey, I've given you my objectives. Here's what I expect out of the force. And one of the things she says, we must promote a culture of data-driven decision-making. And I looked at these two things, I said, wow, we're kind of in the same space that industry is. If I go back even like 2012, 2013, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about, hey, we've got all this data, as a former MI officer, we got all these collection assets. As I walk through the hallways here, where there's all these tools to collect more information on the battlefield, but our ability to actually learn from that, our ability to better inform our decision makers has largely been unchanged since 2012. And it comes down to this. We do not yet have a culture of data-driven decision making. And I think a big part of that is our lack of fundamental data skills across the force. Go to the next slide, please. So why culture change? I have up here a framework that's called CRISP-DM. Some of my industry partners here might be familiar with that. I guess most of the green students aren't. CRISP-DM is a cross-industry standards and practice for data mining. It's something that's been around since the 80s. People have tried to change it, but really they just keep going back to it. And it's a general idea for if I have an organization and I want to use data to make change in that organization, here's everything that must occur. Here's the cycle that I kind of need to go through in order to bring decisions to decision making. And it kind of starts with this business understanding that informs and is informed by my data understanding. So I have my business, I know my business, I know the data that I can collect from that business. From that data that I collect, I next have to bring it to a format where I can actually analyze it, try to work with it, fix it up, get it so it's structured. Sometimes it's coming in as unstructured, so I got to prepare it to do any sort of model. I build out algorithms in this modeling step, and then I get to the evaluation of them. So maybe I've got competing ways to look at this, which is the correct way of doing it. And then either I deploy my results, or I just feed back into my system, and I gain something new about my business. I think oftentimes we look at this process and assume that this is a CDO process. This is a process that exists inside of my office of my chief data officer. So I bring in subject matter experts, I put them in a closet and say, you are in charge of my data problem, fix it. And as we'll see here, some of this is true. Some of this is indeed special skills that a CDO office can bring to an organization. But others of this, other skills, are ones that are inherent inside of an organization that really means that all of us are part of this. So what I want to do here is just kind of walk the dog through this CRISP PM framework and tell you, at least from Nick's perspective, who are the individuals or the offices that can do this for you? What are those types of people you want to hire inside of an organization to make this work? Oftentimes we say, hey, I got a data problem, data scientist. Let me go advertise on USA Jobs for a data scientist. Let me bring somebody in to do this. I argue that that's just a small role inside this CRISP PM framework. Go to the next slide, please. The first individual that I think gets overlooked oftentimes inside of making our organization be data-driven is a data engineer. This was someone that I didn't realize was instrumental until I walked down to the Gap and served as the chief data scientist there. I realized that my skill sets as a chief data scientist weren't what was needed most of the time. Most of the time, what's needed is somebody that can take in the data in its ugliest form, this unstructured data, and put a common structure inside it. Now, throughout all of this, you might be thinking, well, why isn't that talking about AI? All of our leaders are talking about AI. My argument is that AI kind of exists throughout all of this. We could use AI as part of this process of taking data and preparing it for modeling. There's AI that can help there, but it's not an AI problem. It's a data engineering problem. My data engineers are those that are good at data warehousing, information technology, business intelligence, software engineering, focus on the data collection and preparing it, getting it into these data warehouses with these structured data forms for somebody else to actually go and do something with it. When we're building out our data workforce, the first people we should consider hiring are data engineers. Because oftentimes, I think the problem lies in the military is we got all this data, we don't know what to do with it. And it's all in different forms and all sit in different places. I was out talking to some of our colleagues who were building out some robotic systems, and I said, "That's awesome. I love the fact that you're building these things. They're great. Where are you getting your data standards from?" I said, "Oh, that's an awesome question." Because when I ask a question like that, all of a sudden everything changes. They can't sell me on things, right? It's an awesome question. We don't know. We're making it up as we go. And I think because we don't have this data engineering skill set fundamental to our data workforce, what we're left at is everybody that's building collection platforms is defining their data standards in their own way, which is making these data engineers be instrumental for us to actually be able to have an ability to function. So data engineers, very important part of the data workforce in getting our data from unstructured form into a structured form. Go to the next slide, please. Data scientist, the sexiest job in the 21st century, right? This is what I can do for you. So science of extracting knowledge and actual insights from structured and unstructured data, seeking to discover hidden patterns to improve decisions. In essence, it's the modeling and evaluation of the models. How do I know the right algorithms to use? Well, these are the folks that are going to help us do this. And I argue, and inside of academia, we're really good at building these folks out. I can build you some of these. I can teach this pretty easily. I can teach this to a small number of folks pretty easily. They do the mathematics, the statistics, the computer science, the basics of extracting knowledge from data. But again, it requires that work of that data engineer in order to get that data scientist to be able to do this. So data scientists, the folks that are building out these algorithms, they understand the mathematics, they understand the statistics, know a little bit of coding. Take data to create knowledge. Next slide. Oftentimes when we think about deployments, we're trying to deploy an application somewhere, we're trying to build something for the common user to use. These are your software engineers. Folks that are good at coding. Folks that are good at navigating our computational architecture infrastructure that we have in the military. We can actually get things onto other systems. They don't just exist on Clark's laptop. I want to get this out to the force. Software engineers are the ones that are able to actually deploy that. Systematic, disciplined, quantifiable approach to development, operation, maintenance of software and study. That's the deployment of this. So great. Hire these people. Send folks to get degrees out in these fields. Wonderful, amazing. What haven't I talked about? I've talked about almost everything in Chris framework. What haven't I talked about? Business understanding. Go to the next slide. We cannot outsource our business understanding. And to be a member of the data team who is doing this business understanding, you have to understand this entire structure. This is where data literacy comes into play. Someone needs to make decisions based off of this. And someone needs to manage this entire process. If I just go and hire folks and stick them into a closet and say, you are the CEO, go fix this thing, they'll really not be successful at all because they don't have this business understanding. The business understanding, to me, is fundamental to this entire process, and it's the one thing we cannot outsource. The experience that we all have wearing this uniform, by being a part of the Department of Defense, is fundamental in determining what an organization needs out of this entire process. We just sit and let somebody define this for us, all we're going to get is the biases of their upbringing, of their industry that they're coming from. Hey, I hired a 21-year-old straight out of Stanford. They don't got it. We need to be able to provide this oversight. We need to be able to define the questions that we want data to answer from us. This, to me, is data literacy. Next slide. The ability to read, write, and communicate data in context. When I teach this, we'll talk here, I teach a 10-hour course in data literacy. We talk about reading data, working with data, analyzing data, and communicating effectively from an analytic result or analytic process. Do you speak data? And if you don't think you are part of the data workforce, you are wrong. Former Army Chief Data Officer, every individual is part of the Army's data workforce. And it's not to enable this cycle, but rather to drive it. Speaking to my leaders in the room, you own this problem. Your experts that you bring in to help the other parts of the CRISP DM framework are just that. They're folks to help and assist and get you a product. But if you're not making decisions based off that product, if you're not defining the questions that your data workforce are answering for you, you will be unsuccessful. Every individual is part of the Army's data workforce. Data literacy is not solely the role or responsibility of the data expert. If experts develop tools and analytics that Army decision makers cannot use or do not effectively understand the way the Army makes decisions, the Army is no more data rich than if they have no data at all. I like to talk about the LinkedIn graveyard. LinkedIn graveyard are all those experts that we hire and we say, fix this problem for us. They try to do it. They get super frustrated that there's nothing that they're able to change inside the organization, so they quit, and then they write a scathing thing about how the Army sucks and on their way out the door on LinkedIn. I see them all the time. Because we haven't yet changed that culture. Next slide. So, data. What do I mean when I say data? Well, there's the personal data, some real world examples. So, you can see this. You know we've got data, we got our personal fitness, we're counting our steps, we got our mortgage. And we see it, right? We make decisions based off of it. We don't rely on an expert to do it for us. Next. Next. Sorry, just build that stuff. There's personal aspects of data, there's military aspects of data. And it's all around, right? Like it just is. And we've got tools to help us maybe visualize the data. We've got Army Vantage does a great job of putting the data maybe all in one spot for us. But it's not making any decisions. It relies on the individual user at the end of this chain to actually make some decisions. We speak data in our personal life. We do it, right? Whether we think we do or not, we do it. Hey, we're making predictions who's going to win our fantasy football team. We're going to slot somebody in based off of how we've seen them perform in the past. Maybe we fill out algorithms for it, maybe we don't. We make decisions as to what PT plan we're going to do based off of ACFT coming up. We're doing it. We do this oftentimes a lot better in our personal life than we do in our military. Next slide. So why do we need data literacy? Well, I talked to you like, hey, big picture is part of this CRISP DM framework, it makes it work. But practically, the reason we need data literacy, and I had this like epiphany about a year ago, that the fundamentals weren't occurring well, and it was impacting our ability to conduct military operations. Because this was the type of data that we were getting from Afghanistan during the American withdrawal. This is fake data, so all the GT folks here, don't worry, I don't have AMSAT data on that. Right. This, in fact, is kind of a cleaned version of what we got. I had another 100 columns, all equally unstructured. We looked at these, immediately things jump out. We're like, well, you got these document numbers, and some of them are numbers, some of them are just dashes. They look different, right? So those things look different. I've got these phone numbers. Some of them have country codes, some of them don't have country codes. I've got this or, I've got this plus here. I've got citizenship. And I think citizenship means where you're from, right? When I have somebody input, please California, and California is misspelled, what do you think they meant citizenship meant? Where do you want to go? Like, where do you want to be a citizen of? So I had data that even if it had been structured properly, meant two different things to two different people. Didn't properly define what was meant by citizenship. And the sad fact is, the data was of such poor quality that some organizations just scrapped it. There's tens of thousands of these things. So you say, hey, we're going to start over. We tried our best to hack through this stuff. I had some folks that were really hooking and jabbing in this space. I had some really educated data scientists, even data engineers who were looking at this. And we never got to the point where we were conducting data analytics because it was of such poor quality coming off the objective. And it dawned on me that if I think about my data workforce like I think about my medical workforce, we do a really good job of training our brigade surgeons. Those folks who are really PhD level data scientists. I can send you out to academia, get you that, get you some experience building algorithms in business, and you bring it back. I do a good job of maybe training my platoon medics. If you really are interested in this space, there's resources that, hey, I'll go to these Coursera's, all these organizations like Data Camp stuff, Coursera licenses, and they'll go and they'll say, hey, do this on your own. There's resources there. But again, think about my medical workforce, and I think about my data workforce. Well, when I was a lieutenant in 375, before I deployed, I had to do what? Basic medical training, right? Even though I was an intel officer. There was no combat lifesaver equivalent for my data workforce. And because of that, at that point of collect, the same things we expect out of our combat lifesavers, at that point of injury, can you do enough to keep that patient alive until an expert gets there? Can I do enough with my data to keep it alive? Do I know why I shouldn't put a plus sign in the phone number? Do I know why I shouldn't have document numbers with hyphens, without hyphens? Do I know why I should treat citizenship maybe just as binary? American, yes, no. And across the board, those fundamentals of understanding data were severely lacking. The blocking and tackling wasn't done well. And because of that, we were never able to even enter the CRISP-DM class. Next slide. I like to think about this as inverting the bishop. If I look at my data workforce right now, I describe it as a bishop. I've got a whole bunch of folks whose data acumen is pretty poor. And the reason is they don't think this matters to them. Hey, I just joined the Army to kick in doors and shoot things. Great. You're part of the data workforce. I've got a whole bunch of folks that are kind of sitting on the left-hand side of that plot. And I got this giant gulf, and I've got this tip of the bishop. And most of our education focused on those that were already upskilled. My upskilling opportunities were great if you knew the basics, if you already liked this stuff, if you got a STEM degree and taught yourself a little bit of coding. I got a million opportunities for you. What I don't have is a way to engage those folks on the left-hand side. So what we wanted to do was invert this bishop, take us from our current state and kind of flip it around. I want to take all those folks that are sitting on the sidelines thinking data is somebody else's problem and get them to be a part of this. The fact is, for most of our folks, I don't care if you do this wrong the first couple of times. Like, I don't care if you try to work with data and you fail, just try. Become a part of this. Next slide. This is our solution. Data Literacy 101. Built this course out. I built this course out for JSOC. Started giving it to them, started giving it to some of their tenant organizations. And next thing you knew, there was sort of this groundswell of other Army organizations saying, hey, I think I need this too. So we went on the road, traveled around quite a bit, see a lot of stars up there where we gave the training. And maybe you're sitting at one of those places and you're like, hey, I didn't know this happened. Because we kind of did this the wrong way. We went ground up, right? So sometimes I'd go talk to senior leaders. I was like, oh, I was just at your post. I said, wait, what, you work? Yeah, we talked to 20 folks about data literacy, gave them this training. Wow, it'd be nice to know. So moving forward, here's what West Point is going to do for you. Here's what we're going to do. We're developing a train the trainer course that we're going to offer in kind of the May-June time period. I'll have my contact info if you want to send folks to it. Just pay their TUI, send them up. What we're going to do is we are going to not only give the training, but we're going to teach people how to teach this. Because it's not as simple as just looking at material and saying, hey, I can do this, right? So how do you manage a classroom? How do you do all those good things? So we've got about a week-long course that we're setting up to get you those trainers so you can really push this out to your formation. Because I can't do it. My wife said, you're not allowed to travel anymore. Because a lot of those stars were me in my backpack just going around giving them. And we're able to hit a lot. Like we hit 30 courses, me and a couple other trainers. And I want this flooded into the system because it goes back to that notion of culture change. If I want to change a culture, it can't be me. It can't be me and a couple of people that really like this stuff, who know what Kaggle competitions are and are coding on their free time. It's not enough. I got to get this as fundamental as combat life-saving skills, basic marksmanship skills to our course. What that takes is a full investment by you all. Next slide.
So I have a question about this slide. So we have a number of systems that display data and you can filter it to look at different things. Yep. So is this a way to manipulate Army programs and systems, or is this a way to create your own?
Great question. What I think our systems do for us really well right now is help us answer what I call our descriptive analytics questions. I'll give an example of this in a couple of slides. They do a good job of displaying our data. What this course is designed to do is to get folks thinking about, well, are those actually the questions I want answered? And if not, what else can I do with this data in order to get at what I actually want to know? And then from there, how do I structure a presentation to actually take all this data and synthesize it into something small and manageable and create decisions? So that's kind of the point of this. There's no coding, zero coding. I'm not going to teach you how to code. But rather it's thinking deeply about questions that we want to answer from data. What are good questions and what are bad? And then we'll talk about how sometimes the questions that we think we want to answer aren't actually the questions we want to answer. So helping them help their commanders to ask those questions. Does that help? Awesome. So it kind of takes us to what is a good data-driven question. So I'm going to go through here just a couple of snapshots of some of the things that we cover inside of this course. Day one is all about asking a good data-driven question. And because I'm in the military, we have to have an acronym, right? So we say, hey, it's got to be a SMART question. But this actually came from Google, so I think that's a good acronym here. We want a SMART question. We want to be specific, focus on a single topic or idea, not are we doing well getting Americans out of Afghanistan. I'm like, that's not specific. What does it mean for a question to be specific? We want it to be measurable. We want to ensure that there is actually data that can answer that question. That's what I mean by measurable. We talk a lot, though, is we want to be action-oriented. Because I'll tell you, there's nothing more frustrating than as a data analyst to go and work a problem, and you spend weeks and months on this, and you give a presentation, the boss says, "Good brief." How do you ask a question that actually results in change in my organization? And if your question that you're asking doesn't result in changing your organization, I contend you are asking the wrong question. You cannot analyze data just for the sake of analyzing data. You want to create change in your organization. We also talk about ensuring that it's relevant and ensuring that you kind of scope this in such a way. So I'm just going to talk through some of these questions here. You know, as we kind of do this, we send the groups out. We have them come up with their own questions. They come back. We help them shape it a little bit. We say, great. And what we find is the vast majority of questions that people start with are questions that, you know, because they're thinking about the solutions that we have now. They're questions that are descriptive analytics questions, meaning they're questions that are focused on what is the current state of the world. Go to the next slide. What's happened in the past? One of the examples I like to use is, this is my RASC data set. This is who has passed and who's failed RASC. So we got a whole bunch of things, you know, their rank, whether they're married, airborne, age, education, whether they've graduated, some remarks, MOS, gender, GT, push-up steps, run, jump. The actual data set's a lot bigger than this, but just for sake of argument, we start with this, right? A question you could ask is, are older soldiers more or less likely to pass RASC? And I think our systems right now are structured really well to answer questions like this. In fact, I could take this question with a little coaching and prodding. I could give it to an undergraduate at West Point and they could answer this question. Some of them. We're really well set up to answer questions like this. And most people are like, yeah, that's what I want. You know, I want to know, are older soldiers more or less likely to pass RASC? So I say, great, okay. So you go and you give that brief to the commander. Say, hey, I've done this analysis. Older soldiers are more likely to pass RASC than younger soldiers. And that would be the follow-up question as well. Why? Why is this phenomenon occurring? And the data requirements to get to why are different than the data requirements that get to what. And as it turns out, we've got to collect a lot more data, and we've got to be a lot more nuanced when we're asking questions that are related to why compared to questions that are what. Next slide. Sometimes we're confused what we're playing. This is a famous hurricane example. We got hurricanes, we got hurricanes. Female hurricanes are deadlier than male hurricanes. This was in published literature. Peer reviewed. Science. Female hurricanes are deadlier than male hurricanes. And I will say, before we go into this, this is what the data show. This is true. The data show that. And the researchers said, well, feminine named hurricanes versus masculine named hurricanes cause significantly more deaths, apparently because they lead to lower perceived risk and consequently less preparedness. Hurricane Nick, I'm terrified of. Hurricane Nick, you okay? I'm backing down those patches. I don't know the issue with that. Any old timers who know how hurricanes used to be named? Prior to 1979, all hurricanes had female names. And it turned out the researchers here were using 6 decades worth of data. So the underlying cause, the root cause, wasn't the names. It was when the hurricanes occurred. As it turns out, our ability to predict where hurricanes land, our ability to communicate to the audience, our building codes, and all that stuff that makes hurricanes less deadly now are due to when they occur, not the name. So we talked a lot about Occam's razor. What's Occam's razor? The obvious answer is most likely the correct one. This is somebody that did a descriptive analytics, but pretended it was, the next slide, a diagnostic analytics, or wideness phenomenon. It's getting to that next level of, okay, I see a phenomenon, I see the fact that older soldiers are graduating at a lower rate than younger soldiers, but is it due to their weakness? Or is it due to something else? What is that root cause? And I contend our systems are not set up to answer this. So we have them take their descriptive analytics question, turn it into a diagnostic analytics question. We talk about the data requirements for descriptive analytics versus diagnostic analytics. And as it turns out, you can kind of see this as you look at this, if all I want to know if older soldiers graduate RASP at a higher rate than younger soldiers, what's the only information I need to collect? Their age and whether they graduate. But if I want to get to that root cause, and I don't really know what that root cause is, and now I got to collect a lot more information. Got to collect a lot more information. And this can be done. You could hire a statistician to get at this. But if I've got these understandings of my organization that helps me really focus in the collect, well, then maybe I can make it a little bit smaller. Hey, I know that there's something to do with physical strength. So after you find that phenomenon of age, next look at physical strength. The conversation between my people that have that good business understanding of my data workforce. But if I want to conduct a diagnostic analytics, I can't stop at a dashboard. The dashboard does a brilliant job of descriptive analytics. What is going on right now? What it doesn't do is get to that why. So there are two types of analytics I can do. Turns out that's not it. That's not everything. Next thing. We also talk about what's going to happen in the future. Predictive analytics. AIML, right? We hear these terms. Oftentimes, those are thought of as predictive analytics tools. Turns out all of the analysis we're doing is underneath the umbrella of machine learning, but I won't go into that here. I think about people that are building out like neural networks and maybe heard about like deep learning. Oftentimes those are used for predictive analytics. Predictive analytics is when you want to know what's happening next. I go and I do my analysis and it turns out Clark, if I got somebody that looks like Clark and he's showing up for RASP, he's got a 12% chance to pass RASP. 12% chance to pass RASP. So my commander does what? Maybe it doesn't bring in Clark, right? Doesn't bring in Clark. He's only got a 12% chance to pass. And here's where, again, understanding that maybe I don't only want to do predictive analytics. Maybe I also need to do something diagnostic. Maybe I want to know that my predictive analytics was built off of 20, 22-year-olds and Clark's 42. So he's outside of the range of people I've ever looked at in the past. Maybe Clark's the only surgeon that's ever went through this course. I really need to bring in a surgeon. Or maybe the overall graduation rate of the course is 8%. Clark's better than average. So having that context is still important, even when I want something that's solely predictive. But oftentimes, our problems, unless we're looking at like classifying satellite images, unless we're looking at maybe predictions of where violence is going to occur next, even in that case, I would argue that it's not just predictive analytics. There's probably some of this diagnostic analytics that needs to occur. Last form of analysis. Go to the next slide. When it gets all of my ORSs in trouble, it gets all my MI officers in trouble. all right, make a prediction. Maybe I actually need to do some prescriptive analytics. If you do X, then you can expect to see Y. The point here is that depending on the type of question that you want to answer, if it's what is the current state of the world, that's going to require a set of tools to answer. If it's why is the world in the state that's in, that's going to require a different set of tools to answer. You want to know what's going to happen next and so solely predictive, different set. Prescriptive, still different set. So understanding the types of questions that you want to answer is going to completely change that crisp DM framework for your organization. And I don't think anybody can do this for you. I don't think anybody can tell you whether you want something that's descriptive or diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive, other than you. Next slide. Here's what we covered. Day one, all about asking questions. All about reading data. What are different data types? We have them walk out day one with a question that they want answered and an understanding as to what data dictionary is needed to collect this. If I, as the leader in the room, know not only what I want to answer, but what data is needed to answer that, boy, you've just enabled that workforce to really succeed for you. What are different data types? Can we trust it? If you're not the one collecting it, you just log into a system and then boom, here's data. Somebody else collected it. What questions do you need to ask of that data? Next. Let's do this. Day two, we talk about spurious correlations. What does it mean to be a critical consumer of statistical results? Why? Just because something is peer reviewed, maybe you shouldn't buy it. Hey, you should. A lot of peer reviewed literature is good. Not on your mind, but. Work with data. All right, I've got two data sets. I want to combine them. What does that mean? How do we do that? What are some of the tools for analyzing data? What are the blocking and tackling? Before somebody does something fancy, before somebody tries to sell you a deep learning algorithm, make sure they do these simple things first. That's the goal of day two. Next. Day three is all about communicating. As we communicate in the Army, we're always taught what? Bluff, right? Bluff is great when you're telling somebody that something that reinforces their preconceived beliefs. But if I have to tell a commander, a command team, something that's uncomfortable, something that runs counter to how they've done business historically, I probably need to structure that talk a little bit different. I like day three because this is the only time in any Army training that I get to talk about Rick and Morty, so I talk about how they do that and building out these episodes of Rick and Morty, how they structure stories. But how am I going to structure my data story so I can actually create change in that organization? Because remember, if I've asked a good question that's action-oriented, it relates to something that I actually want to see change in my organization. So now that I've analyzed that data, how do I synthesize this down to create the most impact inside an organization? Next. Last days, I'll just put this all together. We allow the brigade surgeon to operate a little bit. So I go through and say, hey, here's what I would do in this situation. Kind of show some of the pain points we would have with that RASP data set. We explore the data, we talk why data cleaning is a pain in the butt. Talk about how we choose to smile on some of these issues of modeling and evaluation. When do I know that I overfit my data? What are some things that I should ask of my analysts as they're actually building this stuff out for me? Next. So I like to lead with some tangible recommendations. So if I was walking into an organization, here are some things I would do. Try it. Ask a question that you think data can answer. You want help coming up with a good question, contact me. I've got my contact info here. But just try it because the pain points in each of your organizations are unique. And we won't know until we get in that space and try something out. What are those unique pain points? Hey, I've got 4 subordinate units, and they're all inputting data into different spreadsheets, into different formats, and I really need to combine them in order to answer this question. Okay, let's talk about ways that we can do that. We won't know that until we've asked that question as to why. Why do you want to do that? Discover where in that CRISP PM process we are failing. Is it in your business understanding? Is it in your data understanding? Is it a data engineering issue? No, I've got good data, I need to build out models. Okay, then that requires data science. I want to make sure that my solution can be pushed out to all my subordinate elements. Okay, that's going to require some software engineering. Each of us are at different places on this, and we won't know until we try it. I think we need to invest in education. I think we need to invest in education. I think we are struggling with the basics stuff. When I first put the data literacy course together, I said, oh man, I think I'm shooting too low. Turns out I was shooting a lot higher than I thought. Some of the basics that if you're really hooking and jamming in space, like, it's obvious, we treat that as unstructured, we put natural language processing here, blah, blah. Most people are on that tail end of the fish hook. We've got to invest in educating our boys. Next slide. I don't think you can outsource this whole problem. I don't think we can rely on pros from Dover to come in and fix this for you. That's like a LinkedIn graveyard. I hate the DoD. They brought me in, and for all these reasons, I was unsuccessful because they didn't do. I can't outsource this. We've got to have those basics across the board. Because it is not the responsibility of a CDO shop to do all of this for you. With that, as an old MI officer, I remember in 2004, 2005, when we recognized that we needed more intel. What we did is we put intel analysts at each platoon. Each platoon had their own intel analysts or deployed. I think that's where we got to get with our data team too. If you've got folks on your data team, bring them with you to the range. Bring them with you to PT. Make them part of that team. If I'm hiring somebody from the outside, get them behind 240 Bravo. Have them run through an ACFT so they see those unique issues for your organization. Give them some of those business understanding skills, not for them to take that over, but rather for them to help you raise those questions. Just like I expect everybody here to know the different structures of data, why is data engineering different than data science, blah, blah. We should expect our data analysts to have a little bit of those military skills. So bring them on as part of that team. Put them in meetings with you. Think about them like we thought about our intel analysts in 2004, 2005. If you're just building this up the first time, like, hey, Secretary says I got to do better with data. I got some funding to hire somebody. Get some data engineers. You don't need me. You're not ready for me. I'm not ready for you. You're not ready to build out algorithms until you get that data in a good format for you to actually do something with it. Invest heavily in data engineers early. I could hire 10 slots, put 9 of them as data engineers, 1 as a data scientist. Early on in the process. Later on in the process, that'll shift. That'll change. But early on, we got to get through that data understanding to data preparation part of that CRISP framework, and that's going to require data engineers. I say if you build it, they will come. If I build out an architecture, data architecture, you will find people that'll come out of the woodwork to play in it. But you've got to have that data architecture solid first. Don't talk about AI/ML unless you have a use case in mind that requires AI/ML. You say, hey, I want AI/ML for my organization. Think through to do what? What is it that you can't do now that would require machine learning in order to answer? Don't do this for the sake of doing it. Just because the industry is doing it doesn't mean it's going to work in our case. It goes back to having that business. Next slide. Here's some resources I like. If you're just starting out, I like Jordan Morrow's book, Be Data Literate. Does a good job defining the problem. I use that and effective data storytelling to build out a data literacy 101 course. Those are the two books I looked at. When I first built this out, I didn't know where to start. I looked at, hey, how are schools doing this? No one was doing it. What resources are available online? Here's the problem with online training. Our completion rate is about, I don't know, we're making up a number here. It's probably too high. Probably about 5%, probably lower. People aren't completing our online courses. They're not working. I like any book by Edward Tufte. You get a chance for your organization to send you to a course by Edward Tufte on communicating data. It's a brilliant job to talk about what makes it effective visualization, what makes it not effective visualization. And leave you one thing, is never make a pie chart. Not effective visualization. I put this one up here. I came across this a couple months back. There's some professors at University of Washington that are actually doing this. They teach a course, one of the most popular courses at University of Washington, called Calling Bullshit. I think it's popular because they just came up with the title, Calling Bullshit. But if you actually go to that website, they have all their course material freely available, and they recorded all their lectures. It talks through all this stuff of what it means for the consumer. How do you know you're being lied to? How do you know? Next. There's a couple other resources for you. At West Point, we have a Center for Data Analysis and Statistics. I'm the emeritus director of this. I ran it for a number of years. If you've got a problem, or you say, hey, I've got some data and I think here's the type of things I want to do with this, contact us. We've got faculty and cadets who can go against these problems. Especially if they're interesting year-long problems, I'll put a team of cadets against it and build up their dissertation. I got Lieutenant Humphreys over here who did this with us, right? Took a real-world problem and used it to build out his thesis for his senior year. We'll do that for you. Let us know. Next. On here with my contact info. If we can be of help for you in your data journey, please reach out. If you're interested in the Train the Trainer course that we're going to be running in May, June, send me a note. I'll get you on the distro for when we lock in the dates. We're still waiting on a couple things to know when that'll be available. Again, that'll be a week-long course, probably 30 hours or 10 hours of fun time thrown in there. So a full 40-hour week. All you got to pay is TDY for your folks. That's all I got. I'll happy to answer any questions that may come up. Yeah.
Hey, sir. Kind of like from the cyber school, so
Hey.
I want to comment on. And I guess the question that we have is like the value proposition for like the maneuver forces in here. So like one of the things that we see is perhaps like a more fundamental thing, and that you have lots of soldiers and you'll have people that are trying to waste hours and hours and hours a day just doing basic fundamental things. Like there's 7 different formats for a per staff report.
Yep.
There are 8 different formats for
Yep.
a readiness report. Like how can we
Great.
focus like how can we focus on the fundamental data literacy?
Yeah.
Those lower elements.
Yeah.
To be able to successfully kind of save time and then be able to get to some of the more high level.
Great. Yeah. So if I think through what a CDO office should be doing at an X-Star headquarters, that can be 1 through 4 headquarters, it needs to be defining those data standards for our force. Because if I've got 7 different forms that they need to fill out for per status, because there has been no centralized organization to say, here's the right answer. We need to do it for you. You cannot expect units to come up with data standards by themselves. And I think that is one of the things that would assist in people realizing there is a value to this. I think once we get beyond that, once we define those standards, once we've simplified the data collect, we'll be a lot further on the process. But I think that's got to be centralized. And I know that runs in the face. But listen, I've been a part of JSOC for a long time. That runs in the fundamental face of how we do business, right? Like we let the tactical edge drive things. This is one of those instances that we cannot let the tactical edge drive because we're going to have 17 different solutions. We're going to be trying to implement them, and we're never going to get to the point where we're moving beyond that poor PAT clerk who's trying to put in 17 different forms.
that leads to another question, which is, how do we get from the DA mandated capital reporting to something that's actually useful without adding additional workload on for that?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you on that one. I'm gonna plead the colonel. I think there are, again, there needs to be some of the stuff that's top down. So being able to get a voice in those discussions, I think is important. Right? So hopefully we're not coming up with data standards that we haven't communicated what they are to people. And hopefully we're listening to the feedback if things aren't working. But I don't know. Yeah.
How would you characterize our decision-making now? If you want to go to a culture of data-driven decisions, how are we making those decisions now?
I think some decisions are data-driven. Like, in fact, if I look at the IPB process, going back to my MI days, the intelligence preparation process, it actually is like the scientific method. And it's built and designed to be decisions that are based off data. So sometimes it's just adhering to those processes that are already. So sometimes I think we're doing it okay. Other times I would characterize our decisions as being either not informed by data based off of our own personal beliefs, or partially informed by data, or we are making decisions that are diagnostic analytic decisions based off of descriptive analytics data collection.
So leaning on your MI background, how would we adjust CCIR?
I think sometimes we've got data like our CCIRs that are unstructured in what they are, right? So, and you can put in anything you want for a CCIR. And I think if we had some sort of structure on that data, we said, hey, here, and I'm just kind of, I haven't thought too much about this, right? But I can imagine sometimes we've got CCR questions that if I thought through what that question was actually getting at, it was just doing the same thing twice. I want to know how people are doing physically, so I have collect their push-ups, and I collect their sit-ups, and I collect their run. And it's really just getting at the same thing twice. So I think if we can take that process and cluster those into commonalities, like here are the type of things. Like don't ask a bunch of questions that all are answering that same fundamental question. Instead, kind of think big buckets and ensure that I've got questions that relate to each of those buckets. Yeah.
So I'm going to jump on that. So I assume CCI, you're talking about tactical type criteria that a brigade commander or somebody is going to outline to make a decision.
So my concern is narrowing down the data to the essential sets to make a decision as opposed to being data hogs and just gathering data for data's sake.
Yeah, so what I would say, so I'm a couch water extender, and we just did JMRC rotation. We're driven by CCIR. And so what we had to force the staff to do is you take your CCIR, which should be a question, where we often fail to turn that into specific information required. So now I can tell my OP, like, hey, an indicator that we are starting to answer this is you see this number of these things at this point. And we have 4 or 5 for each CCIR, and then once they answer them, I call my brigade commander, so we answer your CCIR number, whatever, and here's the answer, and here's a recommendation. But I think it's transforming the question into meaningful information requirements, so we know what data to look for.
Yeah. I just see there's a linkage in your data literacy to our doctrine as written now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I'm about out of time here. I will leave with this. One is contact info. 2 is if you, I don't say 3 things. 2 is if you want me to come out and give the training, I'm kind of like spring of next year is when I can do it. That's where I'm at right now. Happy to get on the road a little bit. But if you are really into this space already and you want any of the resources that we've used in the course, it's all freely available. Like I will give you everything we've got. I just want to push this stuff out as much as possible. That's all I got. I'll hang out here for a couple minutes if anyone has any questions. Else, I appreciate the time.